Our first panel this morning is Promoting Trade for Mutual Prosperity. Please welcome our panelists to the stage.
Okay, I'm gonna be in the front. Good morning. Okay, we need to do a little bit better. Good morning. That's right, we need energy. How is everyone? Yeah, good. How's your experience been so far, Yeleen fellows? Okay, how has your experience been? That's right. Well, my name is Rahama Wright. I am the founder of a social impact business that works with women in northern Ghana. We create high-quality shea butter products that we bring to the U.S. market as a way to support local economic development and bring amazing products to the U.S. market. And I'm really excited to be here this morning to moderate this panel on trade engagement and entrepreneurship. So are you all ready to have a great time? Yes. This has to be interactive. So get your questions ready when we get into Q&A. We want to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. And if you don't ask us questions, we'll start asking you questions. So don't mess around. So let me introduce the panelists. To my left is Regina, who knew? And she is the founder and CEO of Soronko Solutions. And then next to her is Christophe, Allard, the director of North America, Brussels Airlines. And then next to him is Roslyn, Docktor. She is the director of government and regulatory affairs for Watson Health and the Middle East and Africa in IBM. And next to her is Melissa Flood, and she is the vice president of social impact and public affairs at Marriott International. And seated next to her is Sean Mulvaney, the associate director for international business development and U.S. tax, global government relations and public policy at Procter & Gamble. And seated next to him is Jonathan Ortmans, the president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. Give them a warm welcome. So we are going to start the panel by having everyone briefly introduce themselves and the work that they're doing. So Regina, we'll start with you.
Okay. Hello. So my name is Regina Hunu, and I was a 2014 Yali Fellow. So I currently run a tech social enterprise. So I have a for-profit, which is a software development company, and a non-for-profit that has a coding academy that teaches well, we start from 4 years old all the way to 75 years, how to code and digital skills. And we also work with the disabled, so deaf children and autistic children. We all teach them how to code. And I have been recently nominated to the board of a savings and loan, so I'm interested to bring technology into finance.
Wow. I'm Christophe, Allard, sales director, North America, Brussels Airlines. First of all, I want to thank you and everyone for having me today. It's truly an honor for me to be standing in front of such a distinguished audience. I was in Africa for 5 years, and when I got here for the first time, I was truly surprised by the dynamism of the diaspora in the United States and Canada particularly. But now when I look at you, the young African leaders, the future of Africa, I have to say, it's mind-blowing. So all of you, hats off. In my capacity as sales director North America, I have pleasure to deal a lot with the African communities. One passenger out of 2 on Brussels Airlines actually flies from the US or Canada to Africa. So Africa is very close to our heart. And Brussels Airlines is a part of the Lufthansa Group. Lufthansa Group, that means 42 destinations across the continent of Africa, the 311 daily or weekly departures from the United States and Canada to Africa. So that's a very big and important network for the group. Thank you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I would love to practice my Bemba. Do we have any Zambians? Mapoleni Mkwai Mlishani. Natatalazana. When I was a Mutsikana, do we have any Swahili speakers? When I was a Mutsikana, Siwa Pesa, I lived in Zambia, but traveled all over East Africa. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And I also had the pleasure of spending a couple months in Ghana with IBM, who I work for now. Memo IBM is 100 years old. We've been operating in Africa since 1920. We're now in 24 countries, and we have 2 development labs where we develop innovations and commercialize them in AI, data, and cloud in Africa, and for the world. When I say data, we all know data, right? We use data all the time. IBM sees data as a natural resource that but unlike oil, the value could accrue to all if we can use AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence, man and machine. And IBM is committed to ushering in technology responsibly and training IBMers and the world on how to use AI. In fact, we have a Digital Nation Africa program for free that I'd like to talk about later, where anyone can learn the AI skills to unleash the value, because we believe, unlike oil, the value can accrue to broad-based economic prosperity for all of us. And I look forward to that conversation and how we can work together today and moving forward to make sure the government has the right policies in place to make sure this data that's driving innovation, driving entrepreneurs and the businesses you're doing, does accrue value to all. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation in any language you choose. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Melissa Flood with Marriott. So in my capacity at Marriott, I look after government affairs and also social impact for the company. And government affairs, of course, is engaging with governments to make sure that they've got the right policies in place that facilitate travel, tourism, infrastructure, and growth so that more people can travel and see the world. And then on the social impact side, making sure that we're a force for good in the communities where we're doing business, that we are a positive force outside of the 4 walls of our hotels. And so what are our local partnerships? What are the local investment opportunities, the local NGOs that we're working with to make sure that we're being respectful of the environmental resources, the human resources, et cetera, as we're going into new markets and doing so sustainably. It's really our green card for growth. And Africa represents tremendous opportunity for the company. We're a 90-year-old company, 91 years actually. Our first hotel in Africa was in 1971, built in 1971. Today we have 140 hotels across 21 countries with 60 in the pipeline, bringing 6 new brands to the continent, which is great. We have 30 brands, 13 of which are represented today. So we're seeing tremendous growth, certainly amongst Pan-African travel, but international airlift, and with greater connectivity, we're seeing tremendous growth of international visitation. And international visitors come in, they spend more, and then they leave. So it's a great economic opportunity travel and tourism presents for the continent broadly. So I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome. My name is Sean Mulvaney. I work for Procter & Gamble, and it was started by 2 entrepreneurs 180 years ago.
Wow.
And it's headquartered in Cincinnati.
We bow down.
Yeah, it grew from a small startup and spread all around the world. But today I'd like to frame my comments, really help you understand who P&G is, sort of what our business model is, and then relate that to the mission and topic of the panel. I mean, P&G, we make consumer products. We're roughly a $65 billion company. We have about 95,000 employees worldwide. We operate in 10 different consumer categories of goods. So Tide, Bounty, Charmin, Always, Cascade, Crest toothpaste. These are all familiar brands that P&G makes, and there are probably over 20 brands that are roughly billion-dollar brands. that P&G is marketed all around the world. Our business model is one that where we believe in open trade and open markets everywhere, because we don't make consumer products in every country of the world. What we'll make in one country, we'll actually trade with another. So we make detergent in one, we'll make diapers in another, we'll make toothpaste in a third, and we'll make cough and cold medicine in a fourth. And then P&G affiliates will trade with one another across national boundaries, serving consumers through all of our product lines. And we regard Africa as an enormous market for us globally. I mean, we are largely, 65% of our sales are in developed country markets, but 35% of our sales are in emerging and developing country markets. So we see this as our future for growth. And a great thing about our business model that I'd like to talk about later is actually we produce close to consumer. So we're not really exporting from the US, we're making consumer goods in the countries where we sell them.
Well, hi, I'm Jonathan Ortmans. I'm a two-time entrepreneur. I've had 2 startups and 2 exits. And since then, I've dedicated most of my career to figuring out new and better ways to enable people like you to birth the new, to figure out better ways of doing things, to ultimately become entrepreneurs. And in the work doing that, we now work in 170 countries as the Global Entrepreneurship Network, which is now just 10 years old. We're the little puppy on the panel here. But we like to think we have a big punch in those countries for one important reason, and that is that we believe that we have a new generation of young people who are building companies with a different ethic. It's not that it's a generation of social entrepreneurs. There's lots of excellent social entrepreneurship, but it's the for-profit entrepreneurs that are not willing to build companies unless at the expense of any social values that come with that. And so you're seeing a much more generous, much more well-connected, and quite frankly, a generation of people that are having a lot more fun with this as they ultimately disrupt new industries. So my background as an economist and as an entrepreneur obviously brings some rigor and discipline to that, but what we're really about is enabling grassroots movements across national boundaries to build one global entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it doesn't really matter whether you're from one part of the world or another, you can leverage this powerful dynamic of entrepreneurial value, new value creation. So we're thrilled. I will say that we've just opened our first startup campus in Africa. I'm proud to say it is the largest startup campus in Africa. It's called 22 on Sloan. If you Google it, in Johannesburg. We just opened it a few months ago with Richard Branson. It is, for the Americans, 100,000 square feet, which is about 10,000 square meters. And it's kicked off interest from Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, and several other countries in Africa that are going to now do the same and create a central location where you can come together with other Africans and leverage the global connectivity that now exists in the global entrepreneurial ecosystem. So,
that's excellent. Jonathan, I'm going to stay with you for a little bit. The ILO estimates that about 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. And the African Development Bank estimates that about a third of the population between 15 and 35 are unemployed. And so when we think about the development of Africa, entrepreneurship is a critical component to that. With Gen and having activity in 170 locations globally, what is the African entrepreneurial ecosystem like? What are some of the things that you're seeing? What are some of the trends that you're seeing when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Well, the first point is, of course, you put your finger on the number one driver as to why everybody's interested in entrepreneurship. It's not just that it's popular and it's sexy, that you've got people like Mark Zuckerberg out there that are appealing to people. It's the fact that if you look at the United States data over the course of the last 25 years, and listen carefully to this, all of the net new jobs come from firms less than 5 years old. So on average, these older 170-year-old companies are typically shedding jobs as technology makes it easier for them to do things with fewer people, and their shareholders typically say, you know, we're motivated to create efficiencies. But most new firms are always hiring. And so clearly this has been a great way that we've been able to incentivize powerful new constituencies into helping entrepreneurs in those early stages of growth, because it's attacking a youth unemployment problem. Now, I will say, you know, Africa's got this other dimension to it, in that you've got a lot of necessity driving it. You've also got a lot of motivation from other organizations around the world, who quite frankly have been told by a lot of Africans, you know, stop looking at this as an aid situation and look at this as to how do you help empower us and engage us and include us in everything that you're doing, which is the sort of strategy we've approached. And so we are really bullish, obviously, the entrepreneurial ecosystems emerging in Africa. They're able to leapfrog from a technology point of view and not have to update or deal with the fact that they're heavily invested in older infrastructure. But they're able to capitalize on the fact that most other companies and governments are motivated to see Africa succeed, not just because of, as Sean was mentioning, he sees, you know, future growth for the company in those markets, but also because most governments are interested in creating trading partners and economic relationships rather than ones. But most importantly, I think it's the sort of energy and the bottom-up sort of spirit of communities throughout Africa that makes me most bullish. We see, of course, massive leverage of technology, and I think we'll hear about this later from a coding perspective. And we're also seeing a change in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, we work actively in about 23 countries in Africa. We're engaged in, we do something, by the way, called Global Entrepreneurship Week. How many of you heard of Global Entrepreneurship Week? Anybody heard of that? Well, it's a campaign to get more people to consider the path of entrepreneurship in their career, and it's around the world. It's about 40,000 events that happen in the same week in November, and it's a big sort of celebration of the entrepreneurial spirit. But when we look at that kind of activity, we're seeing more and more communities engaging in this experience of testing an idea, figuring out a better way of doing something, forming a team, recycling the idea if it doesn't work. And I think Africa's been, most of the ecosystems that we work in on the continent have been able to adapt faster to this new lean culture of how do you actually do this without having a lot of resources. So we're bullish on it. It's the reason why we opened our first campus in South Africa rather than anywhere else in the world, and why we will be spending a considerable amount of time. And I have to tell you, I hate things to be always about South Africa. Apologies to the South Africans in the room, but we often give too much emphasis. But they're over there, all right. We'll give you a shout out. But I will say, the last 2 winners of our global Country of the Year awards have been from Africa, and I think it really speaks to the immense, not just potential, but I think the immense value that people are now engaging in realizing not just the job creation opportunities, but I think the general economic growth opportunities of homegrown grassroots entrepreneurial ecosystems, building products and services that Africans need.
No, absolutely.
Are we allowed to have a disagreement on the panel? A slight disagreement or a caveat offered as it relates to employment, and I'll speak for the travel and tourism industry. Tremendous growth. These are jobs you can't outsource, and in many respects you cannot automate. So we now have 700,000 roughly associates globally, and with the growth that we are seeing in Africa, same story there, right? These hotels are physical structures. We actually don't own the physical structures. We're not a real estate company. So those are local partnerships. Those are local folks that typically either a large fund or a group of people, a family, for example, that can get together and they are the real estate asset owner. And then the people that are employed are, by and large, all local people. And we still view most cities in Africa as high demand markets, under hoteled. So for us, the development and the growth pipeline means there's going to be a tremendous amount of hiring continuing to come on the continent. But that's a replicable story globally as we continue to grow and just based on the nature of our jobs.
And Roz,
You
did you
can
want to
tell I'm
comment as
eager to
well?
get in also. I don't think technology is replacing jobs. That's what I said. It's augmented intelligence, man versus machine. Not man versus machine, but man with machine. It's just transforming the way we work and the jobs. How many of you check the weather today on your phone, your little app? That's IBM, right? And that was a startup, the weather company, that we acquired. So we like entrepreneurs, one, because we might acquire you, or two, you might use our technology. And that's why we see it as an ecosystem, not a plus minus, but a win-win for everyone. And why we launched this free skills program, if I can touch on that for a minute. When you go home, you can't access it in the US, but when you go home, go to Digital Nation Africa. It's a funny name, Digital Nation Africa, but in short, we call it DNA, like in your DNA, everybody needs to know technology. DigitalNationAfrica.com, and we offer 3 levels of courses for free, web-based. And the first level is the Explorer. You guys are all probably way beyond the Explorer, but maybe some family members, friends, that just introduce you, what is AI? You can even take a course on AI. What is blockchain, which I'd like to talk about later? What is cybersecurity? Not how to use the web and find your email, how to develop an app. All of that is what we call exploring. Then we have what we call innovating, and that's kind of getting to the entrepreneur. How do you develop that app and then attach cybersecurity? We actually give you a platform and free cloud space for you to develop and explore and use the technology to put it to use to solve your business or someone else's problems. And that's what we call the innovator. And the last one is what we call new collar. IBM didn't coin this word, but we're going with it. Is that there used to be the white collar jobs, right? The blue collar jobs. Today, we think most are going to be new collar. Anyone that has IT skills can probably find a job with any of these companies, or you'll be more successful in your own business. But what we provide in that part is job matching. We can use our AI to help you find a job and identify what skills are needed in that area, working with local companies and working with the government that wants to build industries. We have a huge program in South Africa with the Black Industrial Program, and in other countries, everywhere we have a local partner. So I encourage you to go home and look at DigitalNationAfrica.com and welcome thoughts on it. If it doesn't do something you wish or you have ideas, please work with us, because that's what we like to do. We like to engage, and we think collectively, right? People and technology together can have a transformative power.
Thank you. So Regina, you're a successful entrepreneur, and take us back to when you first started your enterprise. I think that there are some people in the audience who'd be really interested in learning about some of the resources that you were able to tap into to grow your business. So take us to that moment.
Okay, so I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I don't think I was socialized like that. I'm sure some people can relate to the type of socialization that you'll get as an African woman. And my socialization was more, you find a job, you find a husband, you make children, So when the whole concept of entrepreneurship came up, I was very scared. And I'd always say, and you hear this a lot with women, there's a voice that keeps telling you what you can't do, So there's all this data on when there's a job application and a man just checks 20%, he still goes for it. But women need to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So I kind of kept telling myself how I wasn't going to make it because I was coming from a middle-class family. And I didn't have a rich uncle, and I thought, you need a rich uncle. But I just essentially had two good ideas. So first, I wanted to use technology to get young people in my country to be able to be prepared for the future of work and also to critical think and problem solve. Because the big challenge in our educational system is rote memorization. And that's what I went through. So I can draw a very advanced electrical circuit, but if you give me 2 wires, I'll just be looking at you like, what do we do with this, you know? And also, I saw an unmet need with small and medium scale enterprises that needed technology, because the technology companies were focused on the big corporates, and nobody was really sort of looking at the SMEs in my country, that's Ghana. So I decided to put the two together. Why don't I work for profit, generate money, and then use my money to run my social impact projects? Because I always thought about self-sustainability from day one. I thought, okay, I mean, even though I want to work towards social impact, it would be great to receive donor funding, but I would always want to be in control of at least the direction and also be able to sustain the project, because I'd seen amazing projects that once the funding ran out, you know, the project stopped. So it was very challenging. I had to bootstrap. So I started with my own money. I started off in my parents', because my father had free internet, so that's some of the benefits. And I worked through the idea. But there's one thing that I was deliberate about, and I think that really helped me. I asked myself, what are my shortfalls? And that was, so I was very reserved and shy, but I was way with technology. And I wanted to create myself as a thought leader in my space, right? I said, okay, I may not be as charismatic to go to people, but what I want to do is position myself so that people find me, right? So I want to be visible. So I want to be able to attract as many opportunities, but in order to do that, I must be visible. So I was very deliberate on how I use social media and how I use the media as a tool, not only for advocacy, but also to make sure that I promoted the cause that I was passionate about and my business. So on all the social media platforms, if you wanted information on technology, women empowerment, technology for social development, I was the #1 go-to person. I was tweeting, Facebooking the same message. So I quickly got, like, so I think a year into my organization, I was profiled on CNN, and Sheryl Sandberg wrote about me in Lean In for Two, and they discovered me off of Twitter.
Oh, wow.
So it has really helped that I took that step, you know, to make sure that I was being intentional about creating not only a personal brand, but a brand for the organization. So it hasn't been easy, but I mean, it was it's been ebbs and flows, ups and downs, but I'm still learning and I'm still growing.
That's fantastic. So even before you had everything together, you decided to take that leap, and you were able to connect your passion, your vision to other people who were able to elevate you. So that's amazing. Christophe, I'm going to go to you next. When it comes to best practices in terms of entrepreneurial development, and Regina just shared her story in terms of when she started, some of the challenges she was facing. What do you think that governments can do to really support entrepreneurs within their countries?
Well, based on our experience at Lufthansa Group, we have two pillars that we use for philanthropic initiatives and entrepreneurship support. There's on the one hand side the Brussels Airlines B Foundation for Africa, and the Lufthansa Group Help Alliance that you may have seen yesterday at our photo booth. And we very much engage into education programs and supporting entrepreneurs, artists to really expose what Africa truly is in our view. And Africa, according to us, is really modern and contemporary. So I think when we start trying to change perception about Africa and show what Africa truly is, that has to be initiated locally. And I was having a very interesting conversation with one of the fellows yesterday, and that fellow was telling me that we need to change the perception of the African themselves and how they look at their own country and the potential of their country, their own potential. And we are there as private companies, organization, to support government to develop that perception locally first, and then we can spread the word globally. So I think it's important for government to have like a long-term vision We see on a daily basis dozens of requests coming from all over Africa, ending up at Lufthansa, Swiss, Austrian, Brussels Airlines for support, for sponsorship. And so it makes it very difficult for us to choose and pick what is really relevant or consistent with our vision. And so I think for us it's very important that we have the right partners, be it diplomatic corps, be it whatever Chamber of Commerce or Pan-African organization that really have that long-term vision. That would be the first point. The second is really for government to team up with private operators. I think when you try to define that long-term vision, it's not all about replicating what your neighbor is doing. It's more about better understanding what are the needs of your own country, of your own market, and what is lacking, what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, and really leverage those. And I think private operators, local operators or global operators may be also well positioned to understand that better and quicker, and giving the proper means to government to really identify what could be a potential strategy. And then the third one would be really to engage socially by developing community. I think when you start doing something that's very much like IREX and Yeleen, it's not all about sending people off once. It's about creating a community, a village where people can really relate to, can share experience, and can really grow on the long run and really exchange. I think that's what makes a program successful on the long term.
No, that's fantastic. I couldn't agree more on the perception issue. So I'm going to turn to you, Melissa, because I know you have a public affairs background. When it comes to storytelling, how important is it for entrepreneurs to be able to tell their story, and what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are really trying to do, you know, what Regina shared, get more exposure and visibility for the work they're doing?
Right. Well, storytelling is, I think, a challenge for mature industries as much as it is for you know, upstarts and entrepreneurs. It is very difficult in this particularly noisy environment to get lift, and I think it can be a frustration point. Candidly, I think even for any company of any size, for any individual that's looking to highlight something, whether you're talking about a business opportunity, whether you're talking about a growth opportunity, whether you're talking about something really incredible like a positive story of your engagement in a particular community, it's just hard to get you know, lift out of that. It's hard to get eyeballs on it. It doesn't mean you stop trying. And it's always really important to have good partnerships, people to tell your story. I think for us, for example, we've seen excellent lift, not because of anything that we have said, but for example, we partnered with the Agyare Institute for Women in Rwanda, and we were able to take several graduates, over a dozen graduates, to the Middle East, train them in our hotels in the Middle East, in managerial roles, and then when the Kigali Marriott opened a few years ago, those women came back and they were the management team of that hotel, right? And the pride of those women in being the leaders and in leadership roles, helping to staff the rest of the hotel as it opened was really incredible. We got excellent visibility on that story, not because of Marriott, but because of Agyare, right? And because we had an excellent partner, and that partnership, of course, continues today. So some of those partnerships that you have, the public-private partnerships, partnerships with NGOs, others in the community, that's a good way to help bring some visibility and broaden the network of folks that are looking at or caring about a particular investment or opportunity, or just, you know, bringing visibility to your initiative.
Sean, so you run a CPG company. And I think often when we hear about entrepreneurship, technology obviously is one that gets a lot of attention. But when it comes to consumer goods, sometimes we don't hear enough about CPG companies. For those who are in the audience who are creating a product, who are creating a fast-moving good, what advice would you give them? And it sounds like with P&G, you're really focusing on producing close to market. And so I feel like there could be opportunity for entrepreneurs who are in your markets be part of your supply chains and value chain?
Well, let me hold off on our business model of producing close to consumer and really sort of target your question, because P&G it's a really large company, and one of the things within P&G that its leadership always does is try to drive home putting the consumer at the center of everything that we do. And so that would be what I would offer advice if you're in the consumer product segment and you're thinking about developing, marketing a product, is making sure that you have the consumer at the center of everything that you do, because it really starts out with understanding consumer need through consumer insights, and then having a product that meets that need in a very noticeable and superior way, like we say also with convenient packaging, with clear communication, and being able to have that in a very shoppable format inside a retail environment where consumers can find the product. And we're often doing battle in the marketplace and thinking in terms of making sure that we win at two critical moments for consumers. One is at that purchase, where we want to make sure that we win with compelling communication at shelf. And then second is when the consumer actually uses the product. We want to make sure that we meet that objective of what we call delighting the consumer. And if we're able to accomplish those things of consumer insight, meeting a need in a superior and noticeable way, then a lot of the other things can kind of fall into place. If you don't have those things, nothing you do after that will make it work. So I would start out with that.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, yes. Did you have a question?
I was going to say I was going to build on that, because sometimes I know with a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with in Africa, they're like, well, it's hard for me to sometimes relate to a corporate environment, because I'm thinking, how do I? And this consumer-centric point is extremely important, but it's also important right at the inception of your company. And it's the whole concept around the iterative process of testing your ideas in a very open source way. The old model 5 or 10 years ago used to be that you were kind of secretive about what you're doing. And now you're like, hey, I want to co-create this with the world. So famous entrepreneurs called this building the airplane in the air. You're out there and you're saying, let's get all of the feedback from this quote consumer, my potential consumer. Let's get people involved. Let's do it together. Let's crowdsource this. And yeah, sometimes there's a little piece of the secret sauce that you don't necessarily communicate, maybe how you're going to make this disruptive and different. But the key thing here is that you are more likely to see a problem in a way that you could solve than, quite frankly, someone that's been had their brain, someone like me, who might have been a little bit older and had their brain into doing this in a certain way for a period of time. And this is the really dramatic opportunity for African entrepreneurs that I want to make sure I've had a chance to emphasize, which is what we're really seeing around the world is this. Every single traditional industry's business model is getting disruptive. Okay? It's not just the Ubers and the Airbnbs. It's every single traditional company. And we have relationships with big companies because they're asking us to help them disrupt themselves internally. So we're bringing in, we actually source people from our ecosystem and accelerators around the world, and we'll say, I would get these 5 guys and see if you can bring them in for 6 months. We're doing it actually with an insurance company in Africa that I won't mention, where actually they've put some of their people in our startup campus for the purposes of actually figuring out, what are the young African entrepreneurs going to do to their traditional business model in the next 5 to 10 years? Because they don't think they're going to operate the way they are. And so I think this is the question of saying, what's the consumer want? And of course, I always use Uber because it's easy for people to understand, but the consumer wanted the ability to be able to immediately access a vehicle, to know who's going to drive it, to know what they're going to pay, and no one actually asked that question previously about their use of a taxi cab. So that's what you've got to do. You've got to look at every product and service you use and say, what's inconvenient about this and what might make this better? And by the way, why do I pay so much money for this service? Is there a way that we can do this for less? And then you do it in a collective community way. So And one quick thing I want to build on this sense of community that was referenced, both from a Lufthansa perspective and also from broader. One of the things that we've introduced in Africa that we're so proud of, we did it with women entrepreneurs in Mali, we've done it across the continent now as a new thing called Startup Huddle. We actually tested it in the United States under a different brand called 1 Million Cups. And frankly, when it came to me, I was like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I don't think we're going to do this. It's a waste of time. And of course, 330 small towns across America now doing this, within 2 years. I'm like, oh, okay, well. So we took it global. And the concept is this. On a Wednesday morning, an entrepreneur or one of you stands up in a circle of people in your community, and quite frankly in Africa, sometimes, yes, it is in a very rural outdoor environment, sometimes it's in an accelerator, sometimes it's in a coffee shop, and they essentially, sometimes it's a large group of people, but the community comes together. And somebody called it the other day, Alcoholics Anonymous for entrepreneurs. You stand up and you say, here are the challenges I'm having, here's the opportunity I think I've got. Let's go for it. And for 20 minutes, the entire community has got eyes on you and they're working on your business idea. Now, let me tell you what that does. Number one, people like me who are unfortunately not right now building companies, which is my passion, we get excited because you know what? Today I actually did something useful. I actually directly helped an entrepreneur. I had 3 ideas and I connected them to 3 people. Okay, so there's a little bit of selfish. I felt good. I was on the front line, okay? Secondly, the community, it actually builds community. So if you don't actually have a critical density in your community for being able to build any entrepreneurial capacity, it does it automatically. And thirdly, the reason people come is, yes, they want to help an entrepreneur, but quite frankly, a lot of them say, it's really useful because I know every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock I can get a free cup of coffee, and I know I'm going to see Regina, Martin, whoever is getting there, I know I'm going to get a chance and I've got something I want to ask them, but I'd rather not do it on email, whatever it is. So people like it because it's what they call in America the barbershop content. You know you're going to be able to touch base with people in your community. So it's called Startup Huddle, and it's free, but it's something that we have the toolkit for and something I recommend that all of you consider doing. Something like that sort of builds community and helps one entrepreneur at a time. It sort of does that community and this sense of making sure that you're doing it. It's, this is the great thing about entrepreneurship. It's a social collaborative experience now. It's no longer a lone man thing, and it's not about money anymore. It used to be about, why can't I get capital? I mean, that's important at certain points when you want to scale, but it's really about human capital.
Right.
It's about how do I do this in a collaborative, creative fashion that A, is more fun, B, is less risk because I'm not borrowing someone's money necessarily, but I'm really much more confident about what I'm going to do when I do eventually borrow money.
Yeah. So Roz, I'm going to ask you a question about money. In terms of investment in Africa and how investing in Africa is a win-win for both Africans and the US.
I have so many ways to answer that question, but I'm going to make this like interactive. Pretend you guys get to vote. Do you want a health answer or do you want an agriculture answer? Well, we'll start with health and we'll see how much time we have. And I thought of the health one was you were talking about that startup, which sounds fascinating. I'd love to get involved. Is that we do something similar within IBM. We take people from all over the globe and in different industries in IBM, and we lock them in a room together for a month. And we through a online challenge anyone can apply for, we lock them in a room with the person that submitted a challenge to solve their problem. So it's not just a coffee, but a month. And so we've got people together there's the African Oncologist Network. I think all of your countries are part of this. Your leading oncologists, your doctors that treat cancer are part of it. And the American Cancer Society, which is a global group that just has the word American in it, and smart IBMers locked them in a room for a month and said, how do we address the cancer growing epidemic in Africa, right? We all know it's going to outpace malaria and AIDS as the #1 cause of death in a few short years, unfortunately. And they came up with, the problem is not only diagnosis, which we can spend hours talking about, but it's access to treatment, right? It's just hard to get the drugs. I lived in Africa. I lived just getting polio vaccinations was challenging. And what they did together was develop a forecasting tool, right? They used AI. They used the African oncologist on the ground that knows the situation. They worked with ministers of health in Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and it's going to expand. I mean, every country was involved, but we spent focused time in some countries. I think Kenya was one of them. And they said the problem is we don't know how many drugs we need, right? We can't forecast. We know cancer is growing, but we don't know which drugs can be more responsive. We got everyone together, and we developed a technology that can address that. Which drugs we need, when we're going to need them, how much we're going to need, so that the ministers of health can do bulk buying, which is what we do in the United States, lower the prices of drugs. It's not just a US supplier, but 2 drug companies, Cipla and Pfizer, have now gone into markets, 2 African markets, where they weren't selling their drugs before, just because they know there's going to be increased buying at a lower than market price in these countries. So that's the power of community, putting people together to use technology, use the local expertise of the oncologists, the ministers of health to solve a problem. And that was all IBM investment. What did we get for that? We get a healthy populace. We get understanding of how technology can be applied. And where you have health, you have thriving people who will buy stuff, grow stuff, start businesses, and buy more IBM products and services. So it's a win-win, and I'm happy later to tell you the transportation story. I mean, the agriculture story.
Yeah, Sean?
Let me maybe come in with this question about connecting Africa and the United States, and maybe a little bit on public policy and how to create the environment for entrepreneurs in a better way. I mean, for P&G, I mean, as I said before, we produce close to consumer. So we actually are bringing capital to Africa. We manufacture in Nigeria and South Africa. We're sharing technology and skills. We're building host country capacities in manufacturing, and it's essential for us to be able to have what we call free trading lanes. We need to bring in raw materials into our manufacturing facilities. We need to be able to export finished product across national boundaries. So where public policy comes into play is what we call trade facilitation. We need to have the ability to thin the borders among African countries so that we can export across all different markets. Yeah. We weave smaller markets into larger markets for economies of scale. And so, public policy initiatives, whether it's COMESA, ECOWAS, SADC, all those regional economic integrations were enormously valuable to companies like P&G, but I think also to entrepreneurs in Africa on a small basis, because they can service customers across national boundaries. Right. And then just to connect it back to the United States. So as I mentioned before, P&G has 95,000 employees globally. We have 25,000 in the US. We have 70,000 all around the world making diapers very close to consumers. What we communicate to policymakers here is that as we're successful in Africa, it supports US employment, because 1 in 5 P&G jobs here in the US actually support our overseas operations and international sales. So, we really embody trade is not a zero-sum game, and foreign direct investment is not a zero-sum game among countries in the world. So we take that message to policymakers in Africa.
Yeah. Can I add to that quickly? He mentioned ECOWAS, SADC, COMESA. How many of you know these regional economic trading blocks? We all know them, yes? On a show of hands, if we can do 1, 2, how many of you think they're very effective? How many of you think they're mildly effective? How many of you think they're poor in their effectiveness? So IBM would like to strengthen them, and we are working with the US government to invest in our research lab in Africa, because we 100% agree that trade can be more efficient, and when trade is efficient, there can be more intra-Africa trade and more global trade. And the intra-Africa trade creates these entrepreneurs and these business opportunities, and then you'll come buy our stuff. And so what we've done is we've invested in this technology called blockchain, and I could spend a long time talking about it, but just think about it as an immutable, can't change, transparent, shared ledger that will automate a business process. What's the #1 export from Kenya to Europe? Anyone know?
Beans.
No, horticulture, flowers. So do you know how many people it takes and how many processes in shipping flowers from Kenya to Netherlands. How many, you want to guess? 200 transactions are needed to ship one thing of flowers. I mean, you guys probably know this better than I should let P&G talk about this. And 30 different people have to sign documents, stamp, approve. With blockchain, that can happen in seconds. And we've proven that with Maersk, with a flower company, with the traders, with the customs authority. We've done this with DHS. If you could go home and have one recommendation, and especially if you're in the goods and services, but even if you just want to grow the economy, broad-based prosperity that we've been talking about, recommend to your lawmakers that the regional economic trading blocks could be strengthened if they were to adopt technology like blockchain. And you guys can actually be leaders. The continental-wide free trade agreement that most of your nations have now signed can actually come to fruition if you were to make your own borders amenable to free trade and quick trade. And you can showcase to the world, Europe is falling apart, right? Their borders are getting more challenging. Africa has a chance to really lead. We always talk about leapfrogging, gazelle jumping, whatever you want. I am passionate about blockchain. I can spend hours doing it, and I'll pass this on. But please read about it and tell your governments to look into it, to invest. We're already investing in our lab, our research lab. We're trying to get the US government to invest. I welcome support and additional conversation.
I would just add, for the travel industry, it's very much the same, right? Travel is trade. When an international visitor comes to the United States, for example, and spends money here, that's chalked up as an export. Same when international visitors go to Africa. So tremendous opportunity as it relates to the same themes, right? Travel facilitation, bringing down barriers. The more stability and more security equals more growth and more opportunity for local employment, local purchasing through the supply chains, et cetera, which obviously has tremendous economic benefit. I would say on the technology side, we've been partnering with the World Economic Forum on an initiative, and Africa has been talked about a lot as an opportunity to leapfrog other continents and other countries where we should be using biometrics more for travel. The process by which people travel is very much the same, and I would be interested in your thoughts on this, as it was 50 years ago. You're still getting a paper passport. You're still going to the embassy. You're standing in line. You're waiting to get an interview. You're getting your papers stamped or foiled. You're taking a trip, in many cases, to take a trip. It may be far from where you live to get to a consulate, to go to a particular place. The more that can be done online, the more that can be done through biometrics, verifying identities through trusted sources, government sources, your banking systems, et cetera, there's a real opportunity. You should be able to travel based on who you are and your level of risk inherent in who you are, not based on the color of your passport. And those are the kinds of initiatives that I think Africa has a real opportunity to grow, and Pan-African travel, the more that can be done around biometrics and less reliance on the paper passport, I think is a tremendous growth opportunity for the continent in terms of fostering that economic opportunity and growth and jobs.
If I can add to this, because I think it's interesting to see we have two different perspectives here. We have the global one with blockchain. For example, Lufthansa Group is, as a matter of fact, the first airline to engage now with SAP to establish the very first airline transaction with the blockchain. That's one side of the story. On the other end, in Africa, locally, we are leveraging local initiatives to ensure mobile payments, because obviously a lot of people live remotely, they don't have access to poor infrastructures, and so they have established a lot of ways to ease access to services, and so now we are allowing payment for plane tickets on mobile cell phones and stuff, so it's on both ends. We have these global initiatives, and we are also leveraging local African initiatives, and that's interesting, and I think that will shape how we do business in Africa also in the future by combining whatever is coming from so-called developed countries and this amazing booming technology that is truly African.
Yeah, that's excellent. Regina, I wanted to bring you in on this because you're a tech entrepreneur. So from your perspective and some of the challenges that you've had scaling your business and the coding that you're training the next generation of Ghanaian youth to be involved in this process, what are your thoughts in terms of what advice would you give to policymakers? What types of partnerships do you look for when it comes to your business, and kind of what is the vision that you have?
Okay, so I'm going to speak first to advice to policymakers because I'm big on, you know, the discussion on policy and changing policy. I think the first has to be like broad-based education on what really is technology, right? Because what we get a lot of is whenever, you know, I go out, so we operate in Ghana and Burkina Faso, in all the different markets. When you're talking about coding and blockchain and augmented intelligence and all of that, you know, some people nod their heads, but then when you leave, then they ask the person next to you, what are they saying? What does that mean? You know, so generally, so let me give an example. So Ghana started this digital addressing system, and you know they invested a lot of money, and now they're like, oh, they'll have to do more marketing because you have to get people to understand. There was a survey that was conducted on mobile money, and you'd have some people saying, oh, they don't really understand how to use it. So there needs to be more education to get the populace, not only the illiterate, few, but everybody to really understand, from your grandmother in the village to your PhD students, the intrinsic value of what technology is, why it's important today. And so then when policy is passed, everybody is on board, you know, so you don't just have a few people understanding all the technical stuff and then majority of the people just sitting around thinking, oh, okay, what's going on here? In terms of the challenges, so there are several different things that happen. I think the first one for me is being in a male-dominated space. And I want to speak to that because it was a real challenge whereby as a female in the tech space, you know, you're going to face all kinds of things. So you have to develop tough skin and change the narrative. So I'm passionate about pushing women. And our first project was called Tech Needs Girls. It was a mentorship program where we were training girls from 6 to 18 on how to code and create tech businesses. And we've evolved that now where we run another program called Women in Digital Skills, where we work with women from the informal sector. So we can literally take a woman that has never seen a computer and teach her to code, teach her to, you know, build a website. And one of the things that happened with that project is now we have, so we have headquarters in the markets, right? So they are called Kayayu, and they carry these things on their heads. And they spend the whole day with their kids on their back, you know, or they put their kids in the market, and it's not the best safe spaces. And these women who have now graduated from the Women Digital Skills program worked with another organization to use Minecraft to teach market children how to create safe spaces. You know, and I mean, they're going to actually develop these spaces, and it's been amazing. So, I mean, I would love more public-private partnerships because that's how you scale innovation. Right. Another challenge is mindset, and we are working towards that. That's why we start early, you know, and getting young Africans to really see their potential, to take themselves out of their community, you know, and know that just because your mother was a fishmonger and her grandmother was a fishmonger doesn't mean you're going to be a fishmonger. Right. You know, you can be anything you want to be, and we're also making sure that, you know, we are empowering them not only with the technical skills but also soft skills, right? Because if you have a technical skill, you should be able to have either some leadership qualities, entrepreneurial qualities. The final thing that I'll speak to with challenges is, I mean, different things happen when you look at within certain countries. So I remember I woke up one morning, withholding tax had gone up, you know. You have to keep innovating as young African entrepreneurs because so many things can change. Like each time there's change in political parties, they bring new policies, it affects so many different things. So you must be thinking on your toes. You know, you never sort of rest and be like, okay, this is working, because you can have a system in place and then change in government or change in policy can, you know, transform things and make things different. So there are all those different challenges, but I feel like you always have to stay resilient and think, how can I jump this hurdle? How can I go around this block? You know, how can I innovate within this space? So we are constantly growing, constantly thinking about, and constantly making sure that we're speaking also to policy so that it gets better for all the other entrepreneurs that will come in the space.
That's fantastic. Yes,
Can I make an add on that? Two quick things for us. I know we want to open up to the floor, but for the fellows. So first of all, I really want to emphasize this, to echo this statement about blockchain. Especially...
I was applauding you, thank you.
Well, no, I think it's really important. In fact, funny enough, all of our global blockchain work we're actually doing it in the context of our research at analyzing the performance of interventions to support entrepreneurs. We're doing it in the context of our ecosystem performance management, but we're basing it all actually, fun enough, in projects that we're doing in Africa. So, but the point is that, you know, part of the challenge is of the opportunity that you have at being exponential. Because all the really exciting environments are going to be potentially a little bit more long-term, but you've got the opportunity to stand out above everybody else if you can really make sure that you really do understand what this technology is. And now, it's so transparent around the world, this information is free. It's not all these awesome companies up here that care about building communities and offering interventions and programs to make it easier for you. But it's also like all the universities. I mean, it's been more than 10 years since MIT put all of its curriculum online and open to free. And the same's true now with, you know, with most of the major universities in the world. Not to mention, you know, the general transparency of the internet. So you can teach yourself about this stuff to a relatively, there's endless programs now. But what you can do that none of us can, well, I'll speak for myself, that I can't do up here, is understand how that could be applied and become relevant to a problem that you're trying to solve in Africa. You heard one about, you know, the difficulty that actually we face as an international organization. You know, our visa, when we have a global meeting every year called the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. We bring a delegation of 100 people from all 170 countries that we operate in into one location. We never have visa issues except in Africa. It always seems, and it's always because, you know, well, I had to go cross border into the consulate to get this. And, you know, I mean, these are like awesome people, but they're having it incredibly difficult. So, you know, whether it's that problem that was brought up or whether it's other issues, you're going to see those problems locally that we can't necessarily see. The other quick thing I want to emphasize is, and this is really important, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to create a new company, you can't do it unless you're also following public policy.
Yeah.
Now, 10 years ago, in the entrepreneurship space, we used to say, even though I also used to work on Capitol Hill, worked in the government side of things, but my point is, we used to say, you know what, the government's kind of irrelevant to us entrepreneurs. I mean, California and tech guys were always like, we want to secede from the union, we don't care about Washington, D.C., it's kind of irrelevant. There's a couple of guys who got a public affairs office there. Now, as you see people like you with the potential to disrupt traditional industries, you're creating a massive number of regulatory headaches for government, and government has no idea how to deal with it. I mean, in our world, Google, for example, created something called Google for Entrepreneurs. In the last 5 years, that's where all their investments have been. They've shifted it actually to their Washington office, where they're hiring like crazy because they need people that can work side by side in a symbiotic relationship with government to figure out how do we deal with the regulatory headaches that are getting created by tech entrepreneurs, and whether or not that's in blockchain or new applications in AI, or whether it be just simply disrupting digital disruption of business models. But I would just tell you, I think the relationship you have with government, I just want to emphasize what Regina was saying, is so important. And in fact, at Gen, I was very proud actually. Tony Elumelu from Nigeria and I co-chaired something for President Obama called the Global, gosh, I can't remember what you called it now. It was a Global Entrepreneurship Commission. And we were involved in doing this Global Entrepreneurship Summit every year for the last 10 years. And one of the things that we came out of that is we created a ministerial for startup and scale-up policy making. Okay, this is just for policies. Sadly, the United States is no longer involved in that, but quite frankly, we've got 90 other governments around the world that are leading it. But we have, the reason that's formed is all those ministers who you said, indeed, I asked them all, how many of you really, if I asked you to stand up and give me a 67 explanation of what blockchain is and an application of what it could do, almost none of them could. I knew one of them could, so he stood up and did it. But the point is, but I think you've got the potential, frankly, to be the educators. They want to know you more than you need to know them. To be honest with you, your government needs you more than you need them, and you should leverage that. You should become, you know, a source of knowledge. You should become actually the people that they're wanting to meet with rather than you wanting to meet with them. And I certainly think in our experience in Africa, in governments in Africa, there is a tremendous power that you hold as people that have more sometimes time, but also the freedom intellectually, but also the generational aptitude to be able to adapt to these kinds of new technologies and opportunities, because they're going to be following you. It's a new symbiotic relationship. It's no longer a hierarchical thing of government controls everything.
Right.
They're just another actor at the table trying to figure out how do we figure out new ways of solving problems.
Yeah.
So, okay, sorry. Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make one point to partnerships, especially with global organizations, and to demonstrate why that is of immense value to entrepreneurs on the continent, because it's an exchange, right? And you'll benefit from expertise from people with different perspectives, bringing different things to the table. So we have been fortunate to work with different global brands like SAP, MTN, General Electric. I just came from a program with Tiger Woods Foundation, and they are looking to go international. And those partnerships help because they helped us in shaping and doing things on the continent. They helped us in also growing and understanding how to be more global, even though we are local. You know, so as we're starting local, we're thinking global. So all those different partnerships come and add value to African entrepreneurs. So I just wanted to point out that you should be open to those kinds of partnerships and see how you work together, you know, so that as you are solving problems locally, you are thinking about scaling globally.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. So Christophe, you will have the last question before we open it up for Q&A. So Lufthansa has supported and sponsored the Yeleen program, and it's a sign of your commitment to advancing issues on the continent. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that commitment?
Sure. Maybe putting things in perspective first, it's interesting to see that US, Canada to Africa has been growing by 14% this year compared to last year. Africa is definitely a booming market. Together with United and Air Canada, represent 20% market share there. So we certainly have a commitment, and that's something we've been realizing over the last 12 months. That we position ourselves as Africa specialist or Africa expert, so to speak. And then at some point you realize you have to define what it means truly beyond your duties as an airline. And that's very much what Brussels Airlines first initiated, and now we're bringing all the Lufthansa Group carriers together into that reflection process. So instead of having that reflection process internal only, we started engaging external parties, starting with the African ambassadors to the United Nations. I'm personally based in New York, so they're very close to me. And we engaged them into a debate of what Brussels Airlines or the Lufthansa Group together as a private operator could do to make a difference. And really walk the talk when we say we are close to Africa, we have Africa as part of the DNA. And the outcome of that discussion was that whatever we do, we have to be consistent, and we have to support present and future economic growth in Africa. And it can be done in different ways. First of all, as a private operator that is so deeply engaged into Africa, we have to make sure we leverage every single opportunity across the organization. That's a massive one for Lufthansa Group altogether. That's 120,000 employees. We have to make sure that each and every one of us really generally engage with Africa in one way or the other. So we are now setting up new exchange programs where we send people from North America, from Europe to Africa, and the other way around, participating to temporary missions to get to know better their local African colleagues, and the other way around, understand different cultural environments, challenges, problems, solutions very often too. And that's one way. Second of all, externally, is to see how we can really make a difference. We always say as an airline, we bring people together, so it's easy, we can transport them from A to B. That's something we keep going and keep doing. I just mentioned the massive growth we have to Africa. 50% of our passenger on Brussels Airlines actually going to Africa. So we need to keep growing as well. And so recently we decided to relocate our sales headquarters in Brussels for the entire Africa continent because we want to leverage that Brussels Airlines expertise, 90-year our presence in Africa. We want to leverage the highly engaged local staff we have across Africa. We want to better harmonize our products. We want to better serve the continent to make travel easy. But that's part of our duties as an airline. So beyond that, we want to really establish the Lufthansa Group as an active player in supporting that economic growth. We see that the population is among the fastest growing. It's among the youngest. It's truly innovative, truly creative. We have to showcase this. We can showcase this through our product. And so now we are reflecting in ways of showcasing African food, African art, African fashion, African technology across everything we do in the Lufthansa Group on our flights to and from Africa. So you will see more and more that African flavor, African touch on our flights. We give more and more opportunities to our local staff to become cabin attendant and really be there on board to serve the African community, speaking the right language at the right time with the right touch. I think that's very important, and that's also part of that women empowerment that we're very much involved into in the Lufthansa Group. And also we are seeking partnerships with public, private organizations to support exchange. And Yeleen is the perfect fit for that because on the one hand side, currently, as we do, we're bringing students, we're bringing young African leaders from all over Africa to the US. That gives them the opportunity to complement their skill sets, that gives them the opportunity to expose their ideas, to find potential investors. And that's how we can really support and go further than just transport them from A to B. So we are seeking every opportunity to engage into long-term partnership with academic organization, diplomatic representations to make sure we are very consistent with the market needs, the country needs. On the other hand side, that's for the future years, with Yeleen and IREX, hopefully, we want to further engage in connecting the diaspora with the mother continent. Yeah. And the more I interact with the diaspora members, and the more positively surprised I am to see how successful a lot of them are, be it artists, entrepreneurs, whatever, philanthropists. It's time for them to give back to their country of origins. A lot of them want to do so, but they don't know how to do it. And so we are, for example, engaging now with the Liberian consulates of Atlanta, Washington, and New York to really establish a comprehensive initiative to sustain that type of approach. And we are doing the same with Ghana, with the Embassy of Ghana in the US and Canada. Ghana is a gateway to Africa. A lot of diaspora members want to get started in Ghana and spread the word through the continent. But I think there is huge opportunity to share experience, to share expertise, transfer it, give back, invest, and really support African in realizing their full potential. That's very much our core approach, and that's why we're so happy to be a partner of IREX for the years to come.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Wow, that was a lot. It's your turn. Do we have questions? Oh, okay. So I believe we have mics, and we'll start over here with this young lady, I believe, right here. I can't see very well.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can take a few questions. Okay.
My question is to the president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. You mentioned about your campus in South Africa, and I want to ask, because most of us here have incubators, accelerators, and entrepreneurship centers. So with your campus, what new methods of training or new systems are you bringing in to promote entrepreneurship in Africa? And I'm sure that you carried out some studies to observe what current institutions are doing in Africa to promote entrepreneurship. What did you observe that we are not doing right, and what do you plan on improving on? And lastly, how can we build strong collaborations between the Yeleen Network members here and your institution? Because you mentioned the Global Entrepreneurship Week, which my organization have commemorated it for about 5 years in consecutive times, but we have never had any contact with your organization. Thank you.
Thank you. And question over here, the lady in maroon.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Ferrand. I'm from Madagascar. I work for the Economic Development Board of Madagascar in tourism and infrastructure. And my question goes for her. Do you have any project, any pipeline in Madagascar? And would you love to come there? Because we already identified beautiful sites and local partnership. And we need like 10,000 rooms in a hotel building in Madagascar. And do we want to come there? That's the question.
That's the best question I think we're going to get all day.
The gentleman in yellow. Sorry, I'm just calling you guys out by your color.
Thank you very much. My name is Kule Musiba. I'm from Guinea. My question is about all the panelists. During the 6 weeks I've spent here in America, I've noticed that all of the American investors, are highly interested in English-speaking country, like South Africa, Ghana, or Kenya, or the like. I want to know, especially, what do you think are special in those English-speaking countries that French-speaking countries do not have in order to attract American investors? Thank you.
Okay. This lady in red over here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ayanda. I'm from South Africa. I'm so delighted to see Mr. Ortman here. He may not recall, but I was with him for the Global Entrepreneurship Congress with Kizito Kuchungu, as well as our now current head of state, Cyril Ramaphosa. I was also there at the launch of 22 on Sloan with himself and Richard Branson as well. I just would like to attest to the wonderful work that's being done there. I also would like to speak a little bit without trying to make myself the spokesperson of 22 on Sloan about the diversity that's there. It's not just a hub for South Africans. We've seen a mixed range of people that are there. We've seen holistic development for entrepreneurs. There's a gym that's there. There's a place for your kids to play. There's a shower room. There's a prayer room. There's all the things that entrepreneurs need, which ties into my question, because sometimes we think it's just about the training on how to handle money, which is important. Sometimes we think it's about training on how to conduct yourself professionally. That is equally important, but we forget about the holistic development of the entrepreneur. Lots of people quit their jobs to be entrepreneurs. Some of them, you are women, and you need someone to look after your kids, so you need a hub that is able to look after your youngsters when you're there, and this one is for men as well. So I love the holistic perspective of that hub, and I think that incubator is different because of that. But my question to you is not just about startup, it's about scalability and sustainability. We have a new trend. Almost every person who's unemployed will say, I'm an entrepreneur. So I want to know, starting up is one thing, it's fantastic, we get excited, we give ourselves the title of CEO, but it's hard to stay in your current business as an entrepreneur. How do we fix that problem so we don't just start, but we have 5, 6, 7, 10-year running organizations that we can pass on to our children and our children's children as well? Thank you.
Okay, one more question for this round. The gentleman in the striped shirt right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel Fire Johnson. I'm from Liberia. I want to say thanks to the panelists and intended admission as a humanitarian professional studies, a professional with the increased polished conversations on trade and entrepreneurship. Sometimes I'm tempted to think maybe I should try that area. And let me say thanks to Regina for the work you are doing with her Soronko Solutions, impacting the lives of Africans. You listed 3 challenges being placed in the male-dominated space, mindset, as well as something else. And I think these fall under what I call unfair competition. So I want to know what has been your own role in terms of robust advocacy to ensure that government policies provide an enabling environment for local entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start. The gentleman in yellow, I think your English, French question, I think it's because of Ghana Jollof. I think that's why. So the first question goes to you, Jonathan, regarding the campus in South Africa, 22 on Sloan, and how your methods are different in terms of your training initiatives. And what are the challenges you're seeing, and what are the unique solutions the campus is bringing?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. Obviously, it's an easy question for us because we're so excited about it. A couple of things I should mention. I think this got born in the right culture. So first of all, yes, we had our Congress in Johannesburg, and I'm a big fan of, if we're going to do an event, I want to know exactly what we're going to achieve out of it, and we have to have legacy outputs, impact, so when we sat down, actually on the last day, all of the international community said, great, we're leaving the facility, we're off to go and spend time in the shared workspaces around Joburg. And quite frankly, they weren't there. So in March of last year, we identified a need. Our managing director, Kazito, was able to pull together a team, and within 9 months, I was standing there with Richard Branson, and we were opening the 10,000 square meter campus. That is a great example in itself of entrepreneurial prowess, and I'll tell you the reason why, because it was African born. It was great that we were able to help. I'm delighted to get people like Richard Branson involved, that we've had a long time relationship with, but the point is it was ultimately an African initiative. But most importantly, every reporter turned to me and said, so what's different about this to everything else? Because this is just, I'm sure this is government funded. And I said, well, look up at that wall. Do you see any government brands on there? Not a single government. We have a great relationship with President Ramaphosa, and he's very excited about this. And the Minister Zulu from that country came, and all the other, they came to the opening, and they were like, we didn't know anything about this. And so that was the exciting thing for me, is that it was an entrepreneurial venture unto itself. And that has meant that it was driven by need. So a few specific things, you can go to the website 22 on Sloan to look for details. But yes, some of the things you kindly mentioned, it's obviously got some great things that we thought were important, which is 24-hour security and parking and putting it in the right place and giving women the opportunity to bring in their children and giving the ability for people to be able to work at all hours of the day and the night in teams. The other key thing that we did was we went to the community. We discovered that one of the successes of entrepreneurial ecosystems is what we call density. You've got to try to get everybody in the same place because it's spread out all over. You're not getting that wonderful intersection of disciplines and cultures that create innovation. And so we went to the major people, like actually Richard Branson with his Branson Center and other things, and said, how is it here? So when everybody comes in here, we're automatically already here. And that was a critical thing to be able to do, like some of the other service providers. But I think the critical thing that was when it was launched is that it's about Africa. And yes, it's about it's around Franco-Africa. It's around Africa as a whole. There was a clear message around everybody that put that together that we are going to actually market this outside of South Africa. And we're going to make it affordable. So it's only approximately $100 a month to be able to be housed as an entrepreneur. And my gosh, did we realize there was demand. There was 8,000 applications for the first 80 spots on the campus. But what are we doing differently? Well, the most important thing we're doing is we're trying to look at the interventions and the programs and the tools and techniques from all the 170 countries that are working. I mean, a lot of people got a lot of ideas. And we basically also turn around and we say, if it's not having an impact, let's shut it down. Because, a lot of people like to start things and they keep them going to sort of, frankly, sometimes keep themselves employed. But the point is, we're like, hey, look, as if this isn't doing results, take your great talents and your experience and let's recycle it and work it into another program. So that's about 22 on Sloan. What's Africa doing? I think the other part of the question on that was, what's Africa doing well? I think one of the things we've seen is the willingness to be open to foreigners coming in and living in Africa and bringing their networks, their capital, but also their knowledge. This is something we learned in Chile with Startup Chile. They actually did a program where, I was there for the first 10 people, but they were individually targeted, people with experience building companies around AI or whatever, and actually have them come and live side by side with you. So it's not like a parachute in and give a speech or hang out for a week. It's like come and live in the community and really understand that many of these panelists obviously have done. And I think that's really helping in some of the communities that are succeeding because it's ideally the diaspora, but not always a diaspora. So I could certainly happy to talk with you afterwards about more specifics in the interest of time. But can I quickly address this Franco-Africa thing?
Yeah,
can I just tell you, I grew up in England, and one of the most remarkable things that I discovered when I moved to the United States, I'm a dual citizen, was I just couldn't believe the poor foreign language skills of Americans. Growing up in Europe, it was like people, almost everybody I knew had at least, we had at least a couple of languages. And so, I as a child was told you did French, okay? But I have to say the biggest reason they're not doing it is that most foreign investors find it hard enough to understand the value proposition of an investment in a startup in Africa in the first place, which is why most of the individuals that I work with, they're going to invest in a fund, or we've got a handful of individuals, or, I invest in something, but I did it because, frankly, Steve Case called me up and said, let's do this with X, Y, and Z, and I think here's the reason why we should do it. People are very nervous about it, but they're especially nervous if they don't speak the language. And so, shame on us. It's shame on us. And the solution is, by the way, it's not an American story anymore. Please take Silicon Valley out of your heads. That's not where you should be going. You're not investor ready for Silicon Valley. But go, for example, to Quebec, to Montreal. Go to Paris. This is where the investment, this is where the investment opportunity, Mr. Macron has launched a massive great initiative in Africa that Jen's involved in, but it's all driven out of Paris. So I would say, shame on us for doing more investing, in Franco-African opportunities. But quite frankly, it's really because most investors would say they're just ill-equipped. And somebody else may have a more sophisticated answer. But I think if you're not getting the investment from Americans, then you should go to French-speaking countries and seek that.
Yeah. So Melissa, is Marriott in Madagascar on the list?
We're not in Madagascar. I looked at our pipeline. I have my little cheat sheet here because it's hard to keep track. We don't have a pipeline hotel in Madagascar. I'm not in charge of development for the continent. Our folks that are there. So I would be more than happy to connect you because I think your story is one that's replicable. As I mentioned, just the tremendous demand for hotels. One interesting statistic that I would throw out is 1.3 international trips were, 1.3 billion, I forgot the important word there, international trips were taken last year. That's growing to nearly 2 billion trips by 2030. Wow. That growth is not because more Americans and more Europeans are traveling. It's because more Africans are traveling and rising middle classes in Asia as well. And so the tremendous growth potential for Africa remains and I think is going to be there for a long time. So Madagascar should absolutely be on the radar screen for companies like us that are investing locally and partnering with local people to make those investments. So however the process works, I would love to get connected, and I don't suppose our folks would let me come on the trip, but I will beg that they do.
And I want to come too.
Thank you, good, we'll all go.
So does anyone else want to take on the question of Anglo-Francophone?
Yes, I would love to. I think that's a very interesting issue or thing, and I fully agree with you. It's all about where you are targeting your potential investors. We are very big in Canada as well, and obviously Quebec is like 100% all about French-speaking countries. And in Toronto, right next door, it's all about Uganda. So it's very funny, but I think part of the issue is also the size of the diaspora and the dynamism of the people representing your countries here in the United States. If I go to some Pan-African event, the interlocutors would be either Ghanaian or Nigerian. And so it's very, very difficult to engage or find the proper representatives or counterpart from Burkina Faso, from Mali, from other French-speaking countries. And when we do so, we really engage into these partnerships, because you have in the diaspora here amazing people that really advocate for your countries and do an amazing job. So I would be happy to connect with you and see what we can do. But we are already engaged into supporting countries like Burkina Faso, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and so on and so forth. So you have to work with people who are interested in French-speaking countries, who are already established in French-speaking countries, for which the French language is not a barrier anymore, and we can certainly assist you there.
The only thing I would add is that Roz and I are actually on the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa, and we recently came back from a fact-finding mission that was led by the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, and teams from the State Department, USAID, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and one of the countries we went to was Côte d'Ivoire, and Côte d'Ivoire is listed as the fastest growing economy in Africa. So it might seem like the Francophone countries are not getting attention, but they're definitely on the radar. And if you want to learn more about the work we're doing on the Advisory Council, you can go to trade.gov/DBIA. And the next question was about scaling. How do you help entrepreneurs scale their businesses? And anyone on the panel can take on this question.
Well, maybe I venture and jump in and connect it to something else I heard in a question, which is, how do entrepreneurs get the skills, in order to be successful? Yeah. And, I had an experience here in Washington where I interacted with a U.S. senator, the head of a country, Costa Rica, and then an advisor to President Juncker for the EU Commission. And all three of those people had worked for Procter & Gamble. And it reminds me how lots of people who work for Procter & Gamble, they may spend their whole lives there, but they get trained there and they can effectively spin off from a company like Procter & Gamble. And if they have the entrepreneurial spirit, they can gain the rest of the knowledge, skills to help launch their own business. So I think, you want to definitely look at building out your skill sets while you're young. Try to get into a company that will train you so that you could harvest that training, contribute to the company, but then build yourself so you're in a position 2 or 3 years down the road. And I think all of us need to support risk-taking, because if you live in a risk-averse environment, then we're not going to have enough entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And Regina, the question about advocacy and women in technology.
So on Monday, we had Masai speak about how we should keep speaking about, women and empowering women. I mean, I couldn't echo that more. So for us, it's about demonstrating that women can. So instead of just saying, add some women for the gender balance or just because it's nice, we're not, we want equity. We want women to have a level playing field. So it's all about showing examples, showing stories, showing role models of women that have done it, women that are doing it, and women that keep going against insurmountable odds. I wanted to also speak to the question on burnout and how do you sustain yourself as an entrepreneur. I mean, you start this journey and you are running top speed. You are just going, and you will reach a point where you have run out of even a fresh outlook into your business because you're spending so much time just hitting at it hard. What I have found is, apart from just finding time for self, which is very important, you also have to empower your team to understand the vision. Because what I discover with African entrepreneurs or even upcoming entrepreneurs is the entrepreneur takes so much on yourself. It's like you are the CEO, the accountant, the receptionist, the graphic, and you feel like nobody's going to do it like you. So it's like you are micromanaging everything. You burn out. So you must learn to trust your team, find the right people. There'll be some mistakes, it's fine, but find the right people and make sure that you give them a sense of ownership into the business so that it's not just you. You have the vision, but you must find people that will carry that vision. So don't take everything upon yourselves. You will not survive that way, And once you have things like family and all of that, as a mother and a wife, wearing 3 hats, sometimes I'm like, okay, mother, wife, entrepreneur, it's all over the place.
Just pick one. For
you know, and I'm barely surviving, barely, you know. So you just have to always make sure that you find time for self and know that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, be strategic, you know, and try and sustain yourself, because there's a lot of celebration in the beginning, but people don't really follow up after some time and say, where's that, you know, startup that we celebrated in the beginning, you know, and there's not so much for after you start. There's a lot of accelerators, incubators to get you to start, but once you are in there, you know, then you see that the support is less. So you have to really find out how to stand on your own and then empower your team so that you can scale and grow.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Jonathan,
yeah, I'll just very quickly build on that point, on Sean's point, because this question about scale up is really important. So one of you stood up and said, look, you know, a lot of us call ourselves the CEO and we don't sustain it. One of the things that most people don't think about is actually privately backstage, I've often been with heads of state who walked out and said, we need more entrepreneurship, jobs, and economic growth, and this is going to help. And then backstage, I'm saying, what? You know, what's really passionate? And they say, you know, the great thing about it is I've never met a single person from a corporation that says that they would not want to hire someone that's gone through that experience of trying to create something out of nothing, of forming a team, of taking risk, of, you know, understanding what it means to have the initiative and do all those jobs that Regina was just talking about. And so one of the things that people don't think about is that even though you're young and we think that you're going to become an entrepreneur now and you're going to do it in a garage, that's actually not the way it happens. The average age last year of a US-born tech entrepreneur was 39 years old. And the reason is because people start, but then often they go to get unique knowledge from an industry. So to build on Sean's point, go, you know, get that startup experience, work out what you don't know, what are the pains and things. Then go work for somebody else in that industry and understand how that industry is going to work. And then come back and disrupt them and take them over.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, don't take them over. You know, come back and disrupt and be part of Marriott, being part of the future of creating a great experience for everybody. So but I think that's one of the things we forget is that as entrepreneurship advocates, we should encourage you also to work in companies where you're going to develop that knowledge and be able to take it from further. So.
Perfect. One last word, Rob?
I was going to say, I ran my own business for 4 years, and I don't talk about it so much because I kind of feel like I got burnt out as a woman. But that's part of the reason why probably IBM hired me and I've been so successful. So well said.
This was a fantastic conversation. Really quickly, we have to, and unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. But we talked about so many different things. I just want to highlight a couple of things. If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a young leader, you have to be engaged on policy issues. Yes. So sometimes we try to step away from the policy side, but this panel definitely on several occasions said, be engaged in the policy process, engage with your governments. Blockchain, 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 blockchain. The other thing is people are important, if not more important than money. People are the gateway to getting access to the skills, the resources, the partnerships that you will need to be successful, even if you're not an entrepreneur, in whatever career and whatever field that you're doing. Perception is an issue when it comes to the countries you all represent. And so learn how to tell your story and don't be afraid to put yourself out there and tell that story. And then, of course, with Regina's example and what she said so brilliantly, which is you can be anything. Just because you come from a history, you said, of fishmongers or farmers, it doesn't mean that's the only ending to your story. Every single one of you who are in this room, I know you've worked so hard to be where you are today, and you've had to overcome so many challenges. So this is one step in a long marathon journey. So thank you so much. Well, give a warm thank you to the panelists who did a fantastic job. Good job, and enjoy
Thank you
the
to
rest
all
of
of
your
our
time
speakers
here.
this morning. Please join us for lunch in the Palladium, Diplomat, and Empire rooms. As a reminder, the summit hashtags are #YALI2018 and #MyMandelaLegacy.